The lights were bright, the cameras locked in, and every word spoken on that stage was carried live to millions across America. The debate had already been heated, sparks flying with each exchange. But then Donald Trump leaned forward with that familiar smirk, eyes narrowing as he delivered the jab that sucked the air out of the room. Asterisk maybe if Barack spent less time pretending to be the perfect husband and more time leading, his marriage wouldn't look so staged. Asterisk, the words cut. Sharp, designed not just as a political blow, but as a personal attack. The crowd gasped, the sound swelling like a wave crashing into silence. You could see the shift instantly. Viewers at home sat straighter. Commentators froze mid-note, and even the moderators hesitated, unsure how to proceed. Asterisk for a split second, the stage itself seemed to tighten. Trump reclined with the satisfaction of a man who thought he had landed the knockout punch, his grin widening as cameras zoomed in. But across from him sat Barack Obama, still calm, hands folded, eyes locked in a steady gaze that didn't flinch. His face gave away nothing, not anger, not amusement, just a silence that carried more weight than words. Asterisk, the audience felt it. That silence wasn't weakness. It was the kind of pause that made everyone hold their breath. Viewers on social media began to type furiously. Clips of Trump's insult already spreading like wildfire across timelines, captions screaming shock and disbelief. But in the room, nobody dared to break the tension. Asterisk, and then came the narration of history itself. As if the moment was already being carved into stone. In that instant, millions felt the insult's sting. Not just at Obama, but at the values he represented: love, respect, family. Yet nobody expected what would follow. Asterisk, Trump leaned back, tapping his finger against the podium, convinced he had cornered his opponent. He had no idea that the silence was not retreat but preparation. Because when Obama finally chose to open his mouth, the weight of his words would strike harder than any insult ever could. Asterisk. What Obama said next would not only silence Trump, it would humiliate him in front of the entire world. Asterisk, the insult didn't land in a vacuum. It hit in the middle of one of the most divided moments in modern American politics. It was 2025, and the country felt like a powder keg waiting for a single spark. On one side stood Donald Trump, the embodiment of spectacle, a man who thrived on chaos, headlines, and applause from his base. On the other stood Barack Obama, no longer in office, but still carrying the symbolic weight of dignity, restraint, and the idea that leadership meant something more than insults and showmanship. Asterisk. This debate was never just about policies or platforms. It was about clashing identities. The soul of the nation reflected in two men who had come to represent opposite visions of America. Trump was arrogance weaponized, blunt, unfiltered, reckless with his words, and eager to turn every exchange into theater. Obama was resilience personified, calm under fire, deliberate with his words, and unwilling to let cheap shots strip him of composure. Asterisk. That's why Trump's jab at Obama's marriage cut deeper than a routine insult. Marriage is sacred for millions. It represents trust, loyalty, and family. To mock it on live television wasn't simply attacking Barack and Michelle. It was mocking the values millions of families hold dear. It was dragging something pure into the mud of political theater, a line that should never be crossed. Asterisk. And in that moment, everyone knew this wasn't just a clash between two politicians. It was a battle over respect itself. Would arrogance be allowed to trample dignity? Would love and loyalty be cheapened into a punchline for the sake of spectacle? Or would someone finally draw a line in the sand? Asterisk. For years, Trump had built his brand on showmanship, on landing insults that no one else dared to say, and on turning outrage into applause. He believed this was another one of those moments, a dagger disguised as a smirk that would leave his rival flustered. But across from him sat Obama, the man who had weathered decades of attacks on his identity, his family, even his right to call America home. If anyone was built to withstand this moment, it was him. Asterisk. The stakes had never been higher. Every eye in that auditorium, every living room across the country, was waiting to see how he would respond. Would Obama lash out, abandon his calm demeanor, and meet arrogance with rage? Would he do what he had done so many times before? Eyes above, and in doing so, redefine the meaning of leadership. Asterisk, that's why the tension was unbearable. Because everyone understood that this wasn't about just another debate, it was about which vision of America would prevail. And as the seconds stretched after Trump's insult, the silence grew into something larger than politics. It became the silence of a nation holding its breath. Asterisk, but to understand the explosion about to happen, we first need to see the fire that fueled it. Asterisk, Donald Trump's rise in American politics was never about subtlety. From the very beginning, his power came not from policy papers or carefully crafted strategies, but from spectacle, raw, unfiltered showmanship that turned every camera into a stage. Long before the 2025 debate, he had mastered the art of making outrage his weapon of choice. Asterisk, he mocked rivals with schoolyard nicknames: Crooked Hillary, Sleepy Joe, Little Marco. To his followers, these labels were punchlines. To his opponents, they were humiliations replayed endlessly across cable news. For Trump, politics was less a forum for ideas and more a gladiatorial arena, where blood, metaphorical or otherwise, was the only thing that drew a crowd. Asterisk. But beneath the swagger and the smirk lived a fragile ego, one that demanded constant applause and validation. Critics noticed how quickly the mask slipped whenever someone got the better of him. When comedians roasted him, he raged on social media. When judges ruled against him, he attacked their credibility. When journalists questioned him, he shouted them down. The man who projected dominance often revealed just how much of his power depended on never being made to look small. Asterisk, and humiliation was his deepest fear. He built his empire on towering gold buildings and self-branded products, each one screaming his name in bold letters. Everything had to be larger than life, because in Trump's world, size was synonymous with strength. To diminish him even for a second was to strike at the very foundation of the image he worked tirelessly to protect. Asterisk, scandal never derailed him, at least not in the way it would a traditional politician. Affairs, lawsuits, bankruptcy, one became another chapter in the saga of a man who refused to play by the rules. Instead of shame, he doubled down, reframing every failure as proof that he was untouchable.
Oh.
Arrogance. To his base, it was defiance, and that only made him more magnetic. Asterisk, yet time and again. His obsession with humiliating others betrayed his own weakness. He didn't just argue with opponents, he sought to belittle them, to strip them of dignity in the most public way possible. It was never enough to win. He had to watch his rivals squirm, stumble, and shrink before his eyes. He wanted the gasp, the meme, the viral clip that would crown him king of the moment. Asterisk, and that is why his jab at Obama's marriage was so in character. It wasn't strategy, it was impulse. The same instinct that had driven him for years. Humiliate, dominate, bask in the fallout. But this time was different. This wasn't a forgotten senator or a flustered journalist. This was Barack Obama. A man who had stood before Trump's taunts for over a decade and emerged stronger each time. Asterisk, the irony was sharp. Trump had spent years fueling conspiracy theories about Obama, questioning his birthplace, mocking his name, and turning his presidency into a target for derision. Yet no matter how many times he tried to drag Obama into the mud, it was Trump who ended up looking smaller. The birtherism crusade that once energized his base had also cemented his image as a man obsessed. Unable to let go of the shadow Obama cast over him, asterisk, by 2025, that obsession still simmered. For Trump, Obama was the ultimate rival, not just a man, but a symbol. A symbol of dignity, of calm, power, of everything Trump could never quite counterfeit. That night on stage, when he smirked and let the insult fly, he believed he had finally found the pressure point. The personal crack that would expose Obama's humanity as weakness. Asterisk, but he underestimated the weight of what he had touched. Yes. Where Trump thrived on tearing down, Obama had built his legacy on lifting up. Where Trump sought to wound, Obama sought to heal. And the clash between those forces, arrogance and dignity, was about to erupt in a way that no headline could. Contain asterisk, yet for all his bravado, Trump never expected Obama to strike back in front of millions.
Trump's persona, built on humiliation, had always thrived on others backing down. But Crockett wasn't built to back down. She had come from a world where insults weren't an anomaly. They were the daily reality. And unlike many of Trump's past opponents, she didn't carry the burden of trying to match his arrogance. She carried something deeper, resilience. And that's what Trump never understood. Arrogance has a breaking point. For years, he had leaned on humiliation as though it were armor. But the same arrogance that once made him untouchable was now making him predictable. The same smirk that once silenced opponents now revealed his weakness. And on that stage, in that moment, Trump was about to learn that the woman he tried to dismiss with a single word was not only ready for him, she was about to turn his entire strategy against him, because the weapon he had sharpened for decades was finally about to be used against him, and Jasmine Crockett was holding it steady. Jasmine Crockett's story is not one of privilege, shortcuts, or inherited power. It is the story of grit carved out in courtrooms, community centers, and streets where voices were too often ignored. Before America knew her as the woman standing toe-to-toe with Donald Trump, she was the lawyer who showed up when nobody else would, the advocate who refused to let the powerful drown out the powerless. Born and raised in St. Louis, Crockett grew up watching injustice unfold in plain sight. She saw how money and influence shielded some, while others, often women, people of color, and working families, were left exposed, unheard, dismissed. It was this inequity that pushed her into the law. But Crockett wasn't drawn to the polished corridors of corporate firms. She chose defense, activism, and cases that others called messy or hopeless. In cramped courtrooms and late-night strategy sessions, she earned a reputation, the lawyer who would fight until her last breath if it meant her client's voice was heard. That same fighting spirit carried her into politics. When she entered Congress, she wasn't just another freshman representative. She was a firebrand. Known for her sharp tongue, quick wit, and unwillingness to mince words, Crockett quickly became a lightning rod in hearings. She was the kind of lawmaker who could strip down the evasions of a witness with a single question, who could expose hypocrisy with biting clarity. But she wasn't loud for the sake of noise. She was loud because silence had been weaponized against her community for generations. Her colleagues, even her allies, sometimes underestimated her. They saw her as too brash, too unapologetic, too willing to call things as they were. But for Crockett, respectability politics was just another cage. She refused to shrink herself to make others comfortable. Every raised eyebrow, every condescending smirk thrown her way only deepened her resolve. She knew exactly who she was and whom she represented, the millions of Americans whose truths were always cut short by someone else talking over them. Crockett's congressional battles became moments of viral clarity. Clips of her fiery exchanges ricocheted across social media. When opponents tried to dismiss her, she turned their attempts into lessons on power, race, and gender in America. "Don't mistake my passion for lack of discipline," she once snapped back at a colleague who tried to lecture her. That line became more than a rebuttal. It became a rallying cry for women who had been told they were too much, simply, for daring to speak with conviction. And it wasn't just performance. Behind the viral clips was a lifetime of preparation. As a lawyer, Crockett had learned how to dismantle arguments piece by piece, exposing contradictions until the truth stood bare. As a black woman, she had lived through the experience of being underestimated, dismissed, told to sit down and wait her turn. Those scars didn't silence her. They trained her to wield her voice with precision. Every congressional hearing, every late-night floor debate, every community meeting where she stood in front of people who had lost faith in the system, they were all rehearsals for the night she faced Trump. Crockett wasn't just another politician stepping onto that stage. She was the sum of every courtroom fight, every insult she'd brushed off, every door slammed in her face. She had been underestimated her entire life, and it had forged her into someone who could no longer be ignored. What made her dangerous To Trump wasn't simply her intelligence or her debating skills. It was that she knew exactly what he was trying to do because she had seen it all before. The smirk, the belittling phrase, the dismissal cloaked as dominance. She had watched men like him fill courtrooms, workplaces, and the halls of power her entire life. But she also knew the deeper truth. Bullies thrived on silence. Their power only lasted as long as no one dared to push back. And Crockett had built her career on pushing back. She didn't just represent herself. She carried the weight of every woman who had ever been called girl as a way to strip them of authority. She carried the voices of every young black lawyer told they weren't professional enough. She carried the defiance of every voter whose dignity had been dismissed by politicians more interested in sound bites than solutions. When Trump leaned into that mic and sneered, "Sit down, girl," the words were meant to shrink her. But to Crockett, they landed as familiar. The echo of every dismissive voice she had already outlasted. He wasn't saying anything she hadn't heard before. The difference was, now she had the platform to answer, and millions were watching. Her journey had prepared her for this exact moment. All the trials, the doubts, the bruises of being overlooked, they weren't obstacles, they were training grounds. Where others might have flinched or fallen silent, Crockett's instinct was sharpened steel. She knew that a single response could cut through decades of arrogance. She knew that by standing her ground, she wasn't just speaking for herself. She was speaking for history. And so, as the audience held its breath, waiting to see if she would falter, Crockett rose taller. Every battle that had forged her resilience surged into her voice. She wasn't there to exchange insults. She was there to make a statement that would ripple far beyond the debate hall. Because this wasn't just about one insult. It wasn't just about Donald Trump. This was about proving that dignity, clarity, and truth could withstand even the loudest arrogance. Her entire journey had prepared her for this one moment. The room crackled with tension. After Trump's sneering dismissal, the moderators tried to steer the conversation back on track, but it was too late. The clash had ignited. Cameras zoomed in, every lens hungry for the next viral moment. Trump leaned forward in his chair, his lips pursed, his hands cutting through the air with exaggerated gestures. His voice rose, sharp and domineering, designed to drown out everything around him. "People don't want to hear lectures from you," he barked, jabbing his finger toward Crockett. "You're all talk, no results, just like every other radical leftist who's ruined this country." Gasps spread through the crowd. His words were aggressive, laced with the swagger of a man who had long relied on volume to eclipse substance. He was in his element, or so he thought. Crockett didn't flinch. Her expression stayed composed. Her gaze locked on him like a spotlight exposing cracks in stone. She waited, just long enough for the silence between his insults to stretch, making him fumble to fill it with more noise. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm, deliberate, cutting through his bluster like glass slicing paper. "Mr. Trump," she said, steady as steel, "you confuse noise with strength, but this country has paid the price for your tantrums." The audience erupted, half cheers, half jeers. Trump's face flushed crimson. He shot back instantly, trying to regain control. He spoke over her, louder, faster, like a man fighting against the tide. His sentences stumbled, interrupted by his own need to dominate the stage. No, you're wrong. Listen, everybody knows. You don't know what you're talking about." But Crockett never raised her voice. She kept her tone measured, every word deliberate. The contrast was jarring. Trump red-faced and flailing, Crockett unshaken, her hands calmly resting on the podium. The optics alone told a story, the old guard of bluster and bullying, crashing against the immovable wall of quiet conviction. As interruptions flew, the moderators struggled to keep order, but the audience leaned in, electric with anticipation, sensing history unfolding. Every time Trump tried to bulldoze through her words, Crockett pushed back with clarity. "I will not be silenced," she said firmly, cutting through his attempt to talk over her. And America is tired of being silenced by men like you." The hall shook with applause. Trump's jaw tightened. He leaned even closer into the mic, practically shouting now, his voice breaking under the strain of his fury. His hands slammed the podium, his posture radiating frustration. The louder he grew, the more composed Crockett became. And that was the heart of the escalation. His chaos, met by her calm. Every time his temper spiked, she countered with poise, forcing the audience to see the stark contrast. For years, Trump had thrived by dragging opponents into the mud, by baiting them into matching his anger. But Crockett refused to take the bait. She stood her ground, not by meeting his rage, but by exposing it. The crowd began to turn. You could hear it in the shifts of applause, in the murmurs between gasps. Every insult Trump hurled now landed weaker, every interruption more desperate. Crockett's composure was winning the silent war of perception. And then, as the tension reached its peak, Trump made the mistake. It was the kind of line that seemed instinctive to him, the kind of cruelty he had delivered 1,000 times before. But this time, the moment was different. The cameras unblinking, the nation listening. He leaned in, his voice dripping with condescension, his words louder than ever. "You don't belong here. People like you should know their place." The words hung in the air, heavy, unmistakable, echoing through the hall like a gavel strike. The audience fell silent. Even the moderators froze, wide-eyed. And Crockett, calm as ever, looked at him with the poise of someone who had been waiting her whole life for this moment. And then Trump made the mistake that would cost him everything. The air was thick with anticipation. Trump's words, "You don't belong here. People like you should know their place," still reverberated through the hall like a cruel echo from another century. Gasps had given way to an almost eerie silence. Every eye in the audience turned to Jasmine Crockett, waiting to see how she would respond. Some expected fury, others expected tears. What they got was something else entirely. Crockett leaned forward just slightly, her hands still steady on the podium. She let the silence stretch for a heartbeat longer, letting Trump's insult rot in the air. Then, in a voice calm but ringing with clarity, she began. "My place, Mr. Trump," she said, her words measured and deliberate, "is standing right here, on this stage, in front of millions of Americans who are tired of watching bullies like you pretend that shouting is leadership." A ripple of applause broke through, hesitant at first, but growing louder. She didn't pause for it. "My place is in Congress, where I was elected by the people, not handed privilege by birth or bought with inheritance. My place is fighting for families who have to live with the chaos you left behind." The cheers swelled. Trump shifted in his seat, his jaw tightening as he tried to cut in. But Crockett's rhythm was unstoppable now, each line landing like a hammer on stone. "You tell me to sit down," she continued, her eyes locked on him. "But women in this country have been told to sit down for centuries. Black women, especially, were told to stay quiet, to stay small, to stay invisible. And yet, here I am, visible, unshaken, unapologetic." Gasps erupted, followed by thunderous applause. A chant began somewhere in the back of the audience, echoing her words. "Here she is! Here she is!" Trump fumbled with his mic, trying to interject, but every time he leaned in to speak, the roar of the crowd drowned him out. His usual tactic, dominating the stage with volume, was failing in real time. Crockett pressed on, her cadence sharp, her words rising with conviction. "You see, this isn't about me alone. When you dismiss me, you dismiss every little girl watching tonight who has ever been told she isn't enough. You dismiss every immigrant family who has been told they don't belong. You dismiss every working parent who has been told their struggles don't matter. But the truth, Mr. Trump, is that they do matter, and they're watching you prove, once again, why you should never be trusted with power." The hall exploded into cheers, people rising to their feet. Even the moderators looked stunned, frozen in the gravity of the moment. Trump's face reddened further. He slammed a hand on his podium and barked into his mic. "That's not true! None of that is true!" His voice cracked with desperation, but Crockett didn't even look at him. She lifted her chin slightly, her voice stronger than ever. "You call it strength to insult women. You call it leadership to mock immigrants. You call it patriotism to divide Americans against each other. But the truth is simpler. It's cowardice. And tonight, the cowardice is on full display." The crowd gasped. Some shouted in support, others whistled, the sound swirling into a storm of energy. Trump sputtered, raising his voice louder, trying to regain control. But his words tangled together, incoherent, swallowed by the ovation. Crockett leaned in closer to the mic now, her voice softening, not out of weakness, but with the precision of someone delivering the final blow. The room hushed instantly, every ear straining to hear. "You tell me to know my place. Well, let me tell you something, Mr. Trump. My place is not beneath you. My place is not behind you. My place is not silent in the face of your arrogance. My place is exactly here, standing toe-to-toe with you, and reminding America that dignity will always outshine your disgrace." For a beat, the hall went silent. The words hung in the air, undeniable. And then, as if released from a collective breath, the audience erupted. The ovation shook the rafters. Cheers, claps, whistles, people on their feet pounding the floor. The sound was deafening. Trump, rattled, gripped his podium with both hands, his knuckles white. He tried again to cut in, his mouth opening, but his voice was swallowed in the roar of approval for Crockett. For the first time, his dominance of the stage evaporated before the eyes of millions watching live. Crockett didn't bask in the applause. She didn't gloat. Instead, she waited for the noise to crest, then gently raised her hand. The crowd quieted, ready for her final word. "Tonight," she said slowly, her eyes never leaving Trump's, "you told me to sit down. But let this be clear. The days of women like me sitting down are over. We are standing up. And we're not sitting back down, ever again." The words detonated like fireworks. The hall shook with applause so fierce it seemed endless. Viewers at home would later describe it as the moment the tide turned, the moment history crystallized into one unforgettable image. Jasmine Crockett, calm, resolute, delivering a takedown so devastating it left Donald Trump rattled, exposed, and diminished. The moderators, still stunned, struggled to regain control of the debate, but the damage was already done. Trump stood there, red-faced and sputtering, a man undone not by anger, but by the sharp, unyielding truth of a woman who refused to bow. And in the closing seconds of the exchange, Crockett leaned back from her podium, her eyes still steady, and delivered the line that would be replayed across every screen in America. "Mr. Trump, history will remember this moment, not as the night you tried to silence me, but as the night you proved you could be silenced by the truth." The crowd roared, cameras flashed, and Trump, so accustomed to being the loudest voice in the room, stood there, visibly shaken, with nothing left to say. Crockett had dropped the mic, and America had witnessed a turning point. The debate ended, but the moment refused to fade. Within minutes of Crockett's devastating counterattack, social media platforms lit up like fireworks. On Twitter, the hashtag #DaHaShunch Trump's insult, was quickly hijacked and flipped into a rallying cry of resistance. Side by side, Crockett clapbacks surged, trending worldwide within the hour. TikTok filled with remixes of her mic drop, line set to triumphant music, spliced with footage of cheering crowds. Instagram reels showcased split screens. Trump's red-faced rage on one side, Crockett's calm, unflinching gaze on the other. By sunrise, the numbers were staggering. tens of millions of views, countless retweets, endless shares. It wasn't just a political moment. It had mutated into cultural currency. Teens who had never watched a debate were quoting Crockett in school hallways. Meme pages that usually trafficked in pop culture now had her face plastered over captions like "Dignity beats arrogance" every time. Cable news seized on the drama instantly. CNN played the clip on a loop, their panelists nearly giddy as they analyzed every beat of Crockett's response. MSNBC went further, declaring it the most powerful debate takedown since Obama's 2008 rise. Even mainstream morning shows, usually careful with politics, couldn't resist. "The moment America can't stop talking about," teased one anchor as they cut to Crockett's words yet again. But the real shockwaves came from voices outside the usual political bubble. Celebrities weighed in. Ava DuVernay tweeted, "Black women have been holding this country accountable since day one." Jasmine Crockett just reminded the world. Mark Ruffalo posted, "That was courage. That was clarity. That was leadership." Even sports stars chimed in, with LeBron James writing simply, "Mic dropped." Everyday Americans added their own testimonies. A Latina teacher in Arizona posted a tearful video. "I've told my students for years that their voices matter." Tonight, Jasmine Crockett proved it on the biggest stage. A Black grandmother in Georgia wrote, "I never thought I'd see the day someone looked Trump in the eye and told him the truth so plainly. She did it for all of us." Meanwhile, Trump's camp scrambled. Surrogates tried to spin the exchange, claiming Crockett had been disrespectful or unhinged. But their clips, stripped of context, only fueled more laughter online. Side-by-side edits showed Trump's bluster melting against Crockett's composure. The villain who once thrived on humiliation now looked small, out of touch, unable to handle the very tactics he had perfected. Commentators framed it as a role reversal, a shift in the story America had told itself for years. Trump, long the master of dominating the stage with insult and intimidation, was suddenly the one shrinking under the spotlight. Crockett, underestimated, dismissed, told to sit down, instead became the symbol of standing tall when it mattered most. The symbolism was too potent to ignore. Headlines crystallized it. Crockett's clapback becomes a movement. The Washington Post. The moment Trump finally met his match. The New York Times. From insult to icon, Crockett turns the tables. Rolling Stone.
When the noise of the viral storm settled into memory, what lingered was not just the spectacle of a debate clash, but the clarity of a lesson. Obama's words had been sharp, yes, but they were never cruel. They cut deeper because they were grounded in dignity, in a kind of strength that doesn't need to shout to be heard. What Trump had tried to wield as an insult against Michelle became, in Obama's hands, a universal reminder of what mattered most. Asterisk, he reframed the attack not as a personal slight, but as a symbol of something larger. Marriage, to him, was not a prop or a punchline. It was a covenant, a bond built on trust and respect. By defending Michelle, Obama had done more than silence a political rival. He had defended the very idea that love itself is sacred, that families are worth more than ego, and that respect will always outlast arrogance. In a nation battered by division, those words carried a resonance that statistics or slogans never. Could asterisk Obama's restraint on that stage became part of the message? He didn't rise to Trump's level. He lowered the temperature by raising the standard. Where Trump sought spectacle, Obama offered substance. Where Trump chased applause lines, Obama delivered truths that echoed long after the crowd went home. And where Trump's attack revealed ego, Obama's defense revealed love. Asterisk, the symbolism was unmistakable. Protecting Michelle wasn't just about his marriage. It was about protecting values that millions hold close. Loyalty, dignity, and the quiet courage of standing by those we love when they're under fire. It was a message immigrants felt when they thought of sacrifices made to protect their families. It was a message parents felt when they looked at their children and hoped for leaders who valued kindness over cruelty. It was a message every person who had ever been belittled for who they loved or how they lived could recognize. Respect is non-negotiable. Asterisk commentators would later write that this was Obama's true brilliance. He didn't just defeat Trump on a debate stage, elevated the conversation. He showed that leadership isn't about who can land the harshest blow, but about who can stand tallest when others try to drag them down. He reminded people that real power doesn't come from mocking weakness, but from uplifting strength. Asterisk, and that's why the moment traveled so far. Why it wasn't confined to headlines or hashtags. Parents replayed the clip for their children, saying, "This is how you answer hate." Couples held it up as an example of how respect anchors love. Communities used it as proof that decency could still break through the noise of cynicism. Asterisk. It became more than a debate. It became a parable. A story of two men embodying two Americas, one clinging to arrogance and division, the other standing in calm defiance with dignity as his weapon. And when the smoke cleared, it was obvious which vision of America people hungered for. Asterisk, because leadership in its truest form is not about tearing others down. It's about lifting others up. It's about defending values that endure when applause fades. It's about standing by love when hatred tries to shame it. And it's about choosing respect, not because it's easy, but because it's right. Asterisk, and so. A single sentence on live television became a reminder of what leadership looks like. Asterisk in the end. What unfolded on that stage was more than a debate. Yes, Obama destroyed Trump with a single, unforgettable counterattack. But the real victory wasn't about one man besting another. It was about dignity destroying arrogance, respect overpowering hate, and love standing taller than ego. That was the headline the world carried forward. Asterisk, and here's the truth. This wasn't just Obama's victory. It was all of ours. Every person who has ever felt belittled for who they are, every family who has stood firm in the face of mockery, every community that has chosen unity over division. This moment belonged to you too. Asterisk, because what we witnessed was bigger than politics. It was a reminder that strength doesn't come from insults, but from integrity. That leadership isn't about tearing others down, but lifting others up. And that even in the noisiest arenas, dignity still has the power to silence arrogance. Asterisk, so. Here's the call. Don't let this moment fade as just another viral clip. Carry it forward. Share it. Talk about it. Make it part of the story you tell about what kind of leadership and what kind of values you believe America should stand for. Asterisk, subscribe now. Not just to catch more stories like this, but to be part of a movement that chooses dignity over division, love over hate, truth over spectacle. Asterisk, share this video with someone who needs a reminder that respect still wins. Asterisk, and most importantly, bring that spirit into your own life, because every act of respect, every stand for dignity, every choice to lead with love adds to the ripple effect. Asterisk, the world saw what happened when arrogance tried to overshadow love. And together, we made sure dignity had the final word. Asterisk.